two, one.
Not quite.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Delusions of Grandeur. I am one of your hosts, but today we're starting a new month with audience appreciation April.
Yes.
So this is where we actually pooled to several groups to help us figure out our intended movies for our discussions. So, Dane, why don't you take it away and tell us what movie that we're going to be discussing, and what was the group that actually suggested this for our operandum?
Tonight's selection is a very special piece. I'm trying to do my jazz DJ voice. Tonight's film is a very special film, one that has a lot of personal connection to me, and it's coming at us from our good friends at Talk Movies With Us. That's the group for this movie and for the one right after this episode. But tonight's film is the 2014 drama, I think, masterpiece, Whiplash, written and directed by Damien Chazelle, based on his short film of the same name, starring Miles Teller and J.K. Simmons, along with our dear Supergirl, a.k.a. Melissa Benoist.
Benoit.
Is that how it's pronounced? I wasn't
Benoit,
sure.
Yeah, it's French.
Yeah. I'd heard Kevin Smith say Benoist, but he probably said it wrong. And probably on purpose.
I would hope no relation to the wrestler.
I would hope so too, but then again, I mean, that's a fairly common last name in the French-speaking world, from what I understand. But yeah, this and also produced partially by our dear Jason Blum, who is mostly known for Blumhouse, which has consistently been producing some of the best horror films that have come out lately. Certainly, some of the most commercially successful. But he's also lent his producing talents to some notable dramas like this film and Black Klansman and a bunch of other recent things. But this film got a lot of praise. It got some good buzz at the Sundance Film Festival, got picked up by Sony Pictures Classics, and has kind of gone on to, it became a pretty damn good hit for a $3.3 million movie. And it, I think, has endured quite a lot, despite it kind of came out of nowhere, but I think it has really proven its kind of cultural value over time. And it most definitely has been a film that has had a lot of personal connection with me, despite me not being a musician. But I think any person that pursues anything with passion, especially in the arts, can relate to it. But why don't we start off? I'll go around the room here, the virtual room, and discuss our thoughts. Let's go with you, Forrest. What'd you think of this fabulous film?
Okay, so this is not my first time. Okay, so this is actually my second time watching this movie. Okay, so I'm sorry. I went into this movie not knowing who Miles Teller was, or Melissa, or at the time Melissa Benoit. She wasn't Supergirl yet. I really only knew J.K. Simmons, and I'd heard good, and I just ended up in the previews looked interesting. I'm actually rewatching this. I actually did forget that this was a Blumhouse movie, especially because this is outside their genre. Even though it's a very intense movie, it's outside their genre, but it's still in a way it's very intense and
a slight nut.
Slightly disturbing.
This could have became a horror movie at several points.
Well, I was gonna say, this is up there with Requiem for a Dream and The Passion of the Christ as far as scariest non-horror films.
Yeah, or even Black Swan. Black Swan, I guess, is considered horror, but I think it's also
kind of, sort of, yeah.
As far as a protagonist with very perfectionist tendencies.
Right.
I thought this is I think it's very well made. It's incredibly well made as far as the cinematography, the music. J.K. Simmons, I definitely think this is definitely one of his best performances of his career.
Mm-hmm.
And did I touch on the music?
Not quite my tempo, Forrest.
Yeah, okay, no.
Which that quote has kind of entered our cultural lexicon in a weird way. But yeah, music, actually, good that you mentioned that. Just super brief overall plot synopsis is basically that you have an ambitious jazz drummer at a very prestigious New York City music college who is under the tutelage of a very verbally abusive and physically abusive music teacher who wants to find the next great musician. And it's all about their kind of dysfunctional master apprentice relationship. And their quest to not only become the best, but to find the best, for the student to become the best and the teacher to find the best. But so you mentioned music. Any other?
Yeah, I guess the editing too is another strong strong point of this movie. Yeah. It's just a very well put together movie. Great cast. I'm just trying. It made a lot of top 10 lists, but I'm just trying to. But this get it? Yeah. Okay, it was
got a bunch of Oscar nominations, and it actually
won 3. And J.K. Simmons did win.
Yeah, the categories in which it won were I think very well deserved. It won Best Film Editing, which the editing was impeccable.
Yes, absolutely.
Best Sound Mixing, again for a music movie, makes perfect sense for the sound mixing to be good, and Best Supporting Actor for J.K. Simmons, which was totally deserved.
Every Oscar this movie won was well deserved.
Yeah,
and this is just very intense. Actually, rewatching this movie for the first time in a few years. Oh my God, it's more intense. It's actually even more intense than I remember. And abusive relationship and like this whole abusive teacher-student relationship. Oh my God, it's Jesus. It's like, oh my Jesus Christ. How does anybody I could not stomach.
Oh yeah.
Anybody having after having worked on a feature film where I had an aide worked under an AD who was kind of like that, I'm like, oh God, I don't think I could ever deal with someone like that ever again. Like J.K. Simmons, that's who J.K. Simmons' character reminded me of.
Well, J.K. Simmons, I think, is a gift to all of us, whether he's in like a relatively more restrained role, like on The Closer, or whether he's J.J. Jameson, either iteration of him in the MCU or not in the Raimi verse, or in this film. It's like, this guy is just a gift. I love him.
Or even as the voice of the yellow M&M.
Yeah. Or I love him in the Farmers Insurance commercials. He's awesome in those.
Right. Right.
It's rough after you've seen Oz.
I'm a fan.
See, that's like the one thing I haven't seen of his.
Yeah, I've not seen a single episode of Oz.
Or actually, I'm here fan of the Ref with Dennis Leary. He had a supporting role as a military headmaster, military academy headmaster.
Oh, and duh, I'm forgetting he was Juno's dad.
Yeah. And it's like I say, he got an Oscar for this, but he really should have been nominated for supporting actor for that year, because between Juno and Spider-Man 3, he had 2 of his best roles. Even though Spider-Man 3 was weak, it was a banner year, no doubt about it.
He was fucking great in Spider-Man 3, like he was good in 2 and 1, Yeah,
I mean, he looked and acted like he stepped out of a comic book.
Let's keep going with this first.
Let's get on.
Yeah, sorry. Give it to me. What'd you think of this movie?
It's not an enjoyable movie, but it's not meant to be, So there's that.
I thought it was a laugh a minute. What are you talking about?
There was some laughs to be had. It's a lot of off-color language we can't repeat, but there was times where I did laugh. I thought that it was definitely like impeccably put together. All the nuts and bolts and cogs and gears are well oiled. It's one thing I found fascinating was that it reminds me, the way it's shot and lit, a lot of it, of like sort of early 2000 to 2010-ish Yakuza movies and several Japanese horror movies as well. It's got that sort of I don't know how to explain it. Like everything's a little bit oversaturated at points, and there's this weird, like that whole part, especially at the beginning, where everything's all green, and he's just kind of walking around, and then they do it later on after. We'll get there, but there was lots of stuff like that in there that it was like, damn, you know, if you just put this in Japan and had these Japanese dudes in suits, this would be a really slick looking Yakuza movie. The music was amazing. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, last night, Brandon and I were talking about Kids on the Slope on our, is one of the new ones that's getting re-released. There are moments in Kids on the Slope that reminded me of this movie, but it's nowhere near as intense. But there are some thematic overlaps there.
Yeah, I would not be surprised.
As intense. We'd be like all jitters by the end of like 13 episodes of that level.
Exactly.
But yeah, I mean, it's, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if somebody on the crew there had watched some Japanese shit at some point, because it just did have that vibe. But then again, you know, lots of movies have had that vibe too, so very well could have been drawn that from someone else who drew it from that. I don't know. The music was great though. There was several parts that I did rewind and like just to listen to the musical number, especially that finale. The editing was spot on too. That's something they slap you in the face with right out of the gate when they're doing that green part, and it's like there's all these quick cuts to the music. It's a great movie. I would probably agree with Dane that I'd file this under probably a masterpiece of this type of shit. You know, just you know, a little disclaimer probably involved for people. Not one you want to like show a friend that's already feeling inadequate or depressed. Or something. You know, make sure they're in a good mood like I was. When that gets just dashed, they're not, you know, ruined for the rest of the week or something.
Have something in backup to watch afterwards.
Just on like Ace Ventura after this or something and just cleanse the palate.
Or a Spider-Man
Care Bears movie.
I think Fletcher would disagree with you there, Mo. I think he would be like, that's exactly what you need to show them to inspire them.
And he just has me in the room with the Clockwork Orange friggin'.
It inspired me, so I guess he's right.
But no, I mean, it's just overall, it's like we were talking about in chat. It's probably a really, really good definition of an amazing movie that isn't necessarily a good time. You know,
right?
Yeah.
That was kind of my takeaway from it,
which is perfectly fair. What about you, David? Give it to me, if you can.
Did we lose him?
We might have.
Are you a Russian or are you a dragon? That's what we got to know.
Yeah, I was going to ask him that.
I'm here.
Go for it.
Okay.
Well, I saw it yesterday, and I thought it was very intense. It was a good movie, but it wasn't entirely my cup of tea entirely. I know that I remember seeing the trailer about it. I know that there was a lot of buzz about it. I know that there was an original short film that was done before it that got a lot of buzz. Why they went and made a feature on it, and I don't know. At the end of the day, it was a rough watch as far as how much intensity the main actor went through. I mean, who expects an actor to bleed for his role? You know. Yeah. But I guess at the end of the day, I understand why it got so much buzz. It did have some pretty interesting camera shots at the beginning and the end. So, I guess I'm kind of neutral on it. I mean, there are things I like about it and things I didn't like, and it's not my top film per se. But I did appreciate the role that we got from the teacher, and how much sometimes our teachers, while we're growing up, end up trying to push us. I guess it depends on how far they tend to skate that line,
Indeed.
Not quite my tempo.
Other than that,
Yes.
right?
Definitely.
Well, I can see why
But,
this. Well, same with like what
that's
Mo
where
said. I can see why for some people like this would either not be their cup of tea or at least not be an easy sit necessarily. Because
Right.
again, it's not really meant to be.
No.
What about you, Brandon? What did you think of this film?
Well, this is definitely not my first time watching this. As some of y'all know, for our channel, and actually even before our channel even existed, Jake and I have always been kind of big into the Oscars.
Mhm.
And this year has been kind of testing both of our patience with the awards, but we are still hanging in there. And like most years, I would be trying like mad because I couldn't make it out to the theaters very often to see anything. So it's usually trying like mad to get what's out. Luckily, the Blu-ray release of this came out before the ceremony, and I got to see it. And the intensity level of that film blew me away in multiple ways. I had multiple teachers that had some similar bent to J.K. Simmons's character in this.
In fact, I witnessed a teacher throw chalk at him once.
Yes.
I'm sorry. That's
yeah, hit me square on the head, I believe.
Oh man, it made contact.
That was creative writing. I remember that. But of course, we had a teacher. I know Jake and I both shared, and when we both did choir, that had some similarities. But his peculiarity, I could see him getting to that level in his own way if he was given a little bit more power. But as it was, he was very eccentric and very, very similar in the ego level. So we got to do. I remember us watching, seeing like pictures, and there was a painting entitled "The Devil," and it looked identical to him. And
it looked identical, but with horns.
And we were wanting to purchase that picture, but it left me to that point to when I heard this come up, I was very apprehensive about revisiting it because it made me feel things that I did not want to feel. As Mo said, sometimes there are such things as good movies that we do not enjoy watching. To the point where we can tell that a movie is good, but my God, it is hard to deal with. And the movies that you not necessarily like, but you can say, this was a well done film, this is a well acted film, but I don't like this film.
Yeah,
now,
it seems like one that you watch once every few years, even if you like it a bunch,
Like the aforementioned Black Swan.
How many apologies
I still have apprehensive about going back to that.
Dude, it strikes me as a movie that there was a lot of apologies given out each time that they said cut,
And so rewatching this was a bit of a struggle for me mentally because 2020 has been hard, and I'm not sure I wanted to put myself through that kind of anxiety again that this film provokes.
You're to blame, audience.
Yes, it's all y'all's fault to talk movies with us. I was actually it was a little bit less intense than I remembered it. A matter of fact, J.K. Simmons came across better to me in this film, and this time watching it than he did the first time. I just flat out hated his character the first time I watched this film, and this time around, I didn't full on hate the character, and I felt like I could see a lot more of the nuance that was put in the role. So I think that a second viewing really helped my appreciation level of the film. I think it's one, after it's been given time to marinate in your mind, coming back to was a good thing. And though it was really hard at points, it was well worth it.
Oh,
Indeed.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And Jake, give it to us.
All right. Well, I'm going to agree, first of all, with a couple of points. One that Brandon just did, which is I did find it a little less hard to watch this time than the first time I watched it. I guess maybe because even though it's been a few years, I kind of knew what to expect. I guess maybe that helped. And I agree, Mo, I don't know if you got a chance to watch the short film, but you were talking about like the atmospheric quality of this one. And I think that is a marked change from the original film. They had a higher budget this time. They had, I think, better cameras and better set design, better sets. I do feel this one was a little more atmospheric. The first one, basically, the music and the acting were what you had to work with. And this time they had the whole package, if that makes sense. So
I did not
was
get to watch the short, unfortunately, but as you know, it's a tasty looking film, for sure.
I'm very happy that it was a bonus feature on my edition.
Yeah.
And so that was really cool. I love it when they do stuff like that. But
hell, I go as far as to say I'd probably buy it to get that, you know.
Right. Well, and actually, I'm just going to bring up very quickly before I launch into the full thing. I'm going to go ahead and bring up my camera quickly to show off tonight's features. One of the many things these have in common is that I had unwatched steelbook copies on the shelf that needed to be watched. And when they were brought up for the same night, I was like, that is cool.
They're both from Best Buy, too.
Yeah, but so anyway, my experience with this one, as Brandon said, when this film came out, we were both trying pretty hard to knock out as many of the buzzed about and especially Oscar-nominated films as possible. And I remember watching this one and feeling absolutely riveted to the screen and feeling utterly exhausted and drained afterwards. It had that sort of a reaction. It is a very, 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 very compelling movie. The music is phenomenal. The acting is phenomenal. Everything, the way it's edited, the sound, everything. I fully agree. The 3 Oscars it won, it deserved. I really think Miles Teller probably should have been up for an Oscar as well, and there were other areas where they could have. Calling it an adapted screenplay is debatable.
Yeah.
Because from what I understand, they apparently made the short film to secure funding for the film. So could it really be called an adaptation of the short film? That's hard to do. So they had that nominated in the wrong category, unfortunately. But this was my first time seeing the short, and I'm glad I finally did it. That was a nice addition. It's basically a scene from the film, but, you know, again, slightly different. Johnny Simmons plays the main character, Neiman, instead of Miles Teller, but you still have J.K. Simmons in the main role. Well, the other main role. You know what I mean.
It's like that clown movie that we watched where the short was just basically like a bit from the movie and they expanded on it.
It's similar, I guess. But so my first impression was that I loved the film, but I was not really in a hurry to see it again. I was very much a booster. As we said before, I'm a big fan of J.K. Simmons. I was so happy to see him get his due. I really wish that he'd probably come back into the conversation because he's still doing quality work, but you know, one day. It's, to me, another thing the two movies have in common tonight that I thought the first time, and this was underscored by the second viewing, I really think there needs to be an Oscar for use of music in film. And this is a poster child for it. Whiplash, I listened to the original recording before the show started. It's a 1973 recording. I can't remember the name of the trumpeter whose album it's on. But it's written by Hank Levy. Whiplash was not written for the film, but it is integral to the fabric of the film. Same thing with Caravan, and which is an old Duke Ellington number. So they need to be able to appreciate the use of music and not just be snooty about, well, that's not original. So that's one of my big soapboxes. So I'll just go ahead and throw that out there real quick.
You're asking the apartment. You're asking the Academy to appreciate artistry. How dare you?
I know. What? How could I do? But overall, this was. It was one of my introductions to Miles Teller. I think I had seen him in one other thing. I had seen Melissa Benoist or whatever it is in Glee. That was my introduction to her, but this was the first movie I'd seen her in. This time around, I was disappointed to recall just how small her role is. But the biggest issue I have with this one, other than the extreme intensity, because it is intense, is that Miles Teller's character, Neiman, is every bit as big of a dick as Fletcher is at the end of the day. In fact, he's probably worse, because Fletcher absolutely loves jazz with every fiber of his being, and he's a perfectionist, and he doesn't care what other people think. It makes him a bit of a monster. But the other guy's just... he's like the Kanye West of jazz. Or he wants to be anyway.
Why do we gotta bring Easy into this? Leave Easy alone.
He's probably more talented, but still.
Yeah, I was gonna say comparing anybody to Kanye West is pretty insulting.
Like jokes aside, though, I do have my disagreements there, but I imagine we'll get into that as we dive more complexly.
All right. Anyway,
to round it off here, so I heard a lot about this film, but it was one of those ones that came out of nowhere, and I was like, what's this movie Whiplash everyone's talking about? And I heard people like James Gunn, who I love, he was a big fan of this film, and a lot of filmmakers, a lot of artists are big fans of this film, not even just musicians, but like people that really devote themselves to any kind of artistic pursuit really love this film, and I can see why. This film strikes a very personal chord with me because, I always endeavor to be the best at whatever I do, especially when it comes to like film, and I know I'm not like the best in the world necessarily, but it's like, in whatever social climate I happen to be in, when I was at school or when I'm in the local film scene or whatever, I always endeavored to make the best work that anybody else around me made. I kind of saw what everyone else was doing, and then I endeavored to do better than that and to do it kind of special and my own thing, and to really commit myself to excellence. And so this really struck a chord with me on that front, but then it also struck a chord with me because if you've ever been around abusive authority figures, whether it's parents, whether it's bosses, in my case I've had both, then that at least with the ones that I've had, they tend to be coming at it from a place of wanting a certain outcome for you and for themselves by extension, but also for you. They come at it from wanting that to take place, but the way in which they are going about it is so profoundly destructive that in many cases it causes more damage than it, because like their stated goal is to try to separate the wheat from the chaff, basically, and to try to get to the meat of who's going to actually be committed to this thing, to devoting their life to the pursuit of excellence. And there is a certain value to that. It's just more so that like there's a line, and I feel like J.K. Simmons' character crosses it all over the place. There's definitely something to be said for pushing people, but you have to do it in a way that doesn't cause them to commit suicide, like one of the people, one of his former students.
Yeah.
and especially in the age of social media and personal accountability and that kind of stuff, it's like, you know, they seem like one of those, that this academy seems like one of those places that could probably shelter a teacher like this for a good while until enough people spoke up about it. You know, because if he were like a public school teacher or something, you know, he'd be out of there like that. But it's just that this place has prestige and, you know, has a certain veneer to it that can protect people like that. But that being said, you know, there's also the master-student relationship in this film that, you know, you have a student that is fully committed to his craft, and he's also trying to crack the code of this very specific, very authoritarian person who is very knowledgeable, very passionate, wants to find the next great musician, and is going about it in a way that is so counterproductive to that goal. And yet, you know, he's also able to, you know, it's the hot fires that and the pounding that produces the blade from the molten metal, you know. And so I think that's kind of his stated goal behind the thing. And so kind of them trying to figure each other out, you know, they do eventually get to that place of greatness. It's just, you know, the tolls that it takes on both of them to get there, because both of them undergo changes and undergo personal tragedies and sacrifices in order to get there. So it's like they do achieve that goal of greatness, but it's just the way in which they go about it, I think, kind of has more needless pain and sacrifice than is necessary. But then again, you know, greatness was never achieved by stagnation, you know, and so that's really what this speaks to, is the fact that, you know, you have to really put yourself out there and you have to really commit yourself to doing anything well. And that often can come with pain and setbacks and that kind of stuff. And we're sort of used to the conventional narrative of that sort of thing, with like the actor who can't catch a break and then after many auditions finally gets the big role. You know, we're so used to that, but we're not used to like the abusive master apprentice relationship narrative in the way that I think we should be, because that, you know, I experienced that a lot in my life, so I can really relate to this film. I really was not at all a fan of Miles Teller. In fact, I kind of hated the characters that he tended to play in other roles. Like I'm thinking of like The Spectacular Now. I hated his character in that film.
He was good in that.
No, he played the character well. I just hated that person. I absolutely despised him. But then, he tended to be cast as douchebags, and so that didn't really like make me like him all that much. Then I see this film, and I was like, I relate to this guy a lot, and so I you know, I like you. Like I'm not like a mega fan of his necessarily. I don't hate him in the way that I once did, because I didn't know him. You know, I didn't know the full scope of his work and all that. But he gets this guy and makes the audience get this guy in the same way that J.K. Simmons, who I always loved to death ever since I saw Spider-Man 1 as a kid. You know, he's been one of my favorites. Even if he's in like a teeny tiny little voiceover role, like in True Grit, you know, he voices the Matty Ross's lawyer. You know, just one single like you know 30-second bit. He's great in that. You know, so I'm a fan. But this and J. Jonah Jameson are both kind of his crowning glories, but just on opposite ends of the spectrum. And yeah, he just gives a bravura performance, and everything everyone else has already mentioned: editing, music, cinematography, every intensity. And just to wrap this up, I am a huge fan of the, like I mentioned before, the scariest films that are not horror films, or perhaps better said, most intense films that are not horror films. I'm a big fan of that type of film, specifically in the drama category, because it's a very niche group of films. But when a non-horror film can be as intense, if not more intense, than a horror film, I think that deserves a lot of praise. Plus the fact that this movie has something to say. It's a movie that really it puts you in the mindset of somebody that is driven and wants to be great, and the steps that he will go through to get there, and just how painful that is, quite literally painful for him, bleeding on his drum set or having a chair thrown at him and all that kind of stuff. I mean, greatness does not come easily to people. Those of us who really earn it and don't, they're not the sons of kings, and they don't, win the lottery or whatever, which it's like he really earns everything he gets in this, both good and bad. And oftentimes in the pursuit of a greater goal, you get both good and bad results.
I think I'll go ahead and mention real quick, like as far as initial impressions, there was one line that stuck with me over the last 5 years that I fully remembered from my initial viewing. And it wasn't not quite my tempo, although that is sort of an iconic line.
It really is.
From this one. But it was the one near the end of the film where the two of them are sitting together in the bar, and Fletcher says, "There are no two words in the English language more harmful than good job."
I know.
And that just kind of sums up his teaching philosophy. But it's, in a sense, it fits right into what you were just saying. Like, the conventional narrative is that the person starts finally getting those plaudits. They start getting the praise and all this stuff. And this one kind of sidesteps that. It's like the guy ends up walking into a trap only to turn it around. And I will get to that, of course. But that's the
well,
I did like that line.
Well, don't you agree with me that we need more of these kinds of narratives, of like the not so much the kind of standard I'm thinking of like the actor narrative of like the you keep failing, and then it just has the one thing that turns it around, which that can indeed happen for a lot of people, and it does indeed happen. But it's what I like about the way that this plot is structured is that you see like small victories all along the way, but with each, it's like advancing to the next. Well, I mentioned master and apprentice relationship. In apprenticeship, traditionally, you have different levels of apprenticeship, and then what do? You present your masterpiece, your piece that you present for your master, so that you say, this is what I learned under you, and therefore, I have now, the student has either met up with the master or in some cases surpassed the master. But like that's how traditionally that stuff works. So like he gets small victories along the way, but with each small victory presents a whole other challenge. And so, it gets, so like, yeah, he wins a little bit each time, but it's like, it gets harder each time, which I find that's very true to life.
Yes. I mean, we've definitely, we're chock full of the whole, just keep at it, kid, and have fun, and you'll get there. Eventually you'll get that pat on the back, and that makes people chase that shit, whereas with certain stuff, especially purely skill-based areas like drumming, it's not the same as necessarily like acting. You can't just luck into being a great drummer. It takes practice. It takes perseverance. It takes dedication. You're gonna bleed for that shit, and
exactly. And I think that's what I like about
to show that end of things too, as opposed to the always like, well, if you're lucky, kid, you'll make it big,
Yeah. Like well, and that's what I like about this, as opposed to, and even if a movie that I absolutely adore, like Rocky, like they, the whole thrust of that movie is that it is kind of a Cinderella story, just out of nowhere, kind of a nobody, a shot at the title kind of thing, which that's Mickey even says it, what happened to you was freak luck, and yeah, it is. But like, you can become really great at something if you work your fucking ass off at it. And, this movie is about that. And I really think that's important,
So that there is a line though. And,
of course.
And I think that's the, as somebody who has studied psychological effects on people, manipulation, things like that, there is a level when you push and push to where they stop getting better and you
And they
actually
get
start
worse.
getting worse, because not only are you and you see this in the character as he's going through, because eventually that person starts to resent what they get. They start to resent everything around them,
For sure.
and learn to hate that what they
Uh-huh.
used to love. So when you lose the love for it and you're just practicing it over and over again, you eventually just stop getting better. You start getting more frustrated, and you cannot break through because, again, you have no confidence.
Well, and there it is, man. I mean, that's the movie in a nutshell. Like that scene that Jake brought up with them at the bar. That's the scene of the movie to me, because it you know, brings both sides of the point home perfectly. You know,
Well,
can't break them down if you're not going to build them back up again.
Exactly. Well, and I'm with you fully, because like I say I can speak to this now. I have had authority figures. I've had them yell at me and guilt trip me and kind of manipulate me and that kind of stuff. Like I'm thinking bosses I've had and parents and stuff. I've had that happen, and in certain cases it was that they just don't know how else to communicate it, or they're trying. I think I got the sense with J.K. Simmons, with his character, I got the sense that was a very deliberate strategy in order to it's like, I'm gonna break as many rocks as I possibly have to in order to find the diamond in the rough. It doesn't matter how many I have to break along the way, I'm gonna find that next great diamond. So it seemed like a very deliberate strategy, whereas other people that I've met, like, they have done it because they're just horrible at communicating. And so sometimes it can be kind of a combination of the two. So it's not an either or thing, but like, you're right. There is absolutely 100%. There is a line at which people will no longer get better. They'll get worse, and they may, lash out, or they might take it out on themselves. Like you see both happen in this, so it's like there's definitely a line. I am a big believer in positive reinforcement, very much so, but I also know that you have to have you either have to be really self-directed anyway, or you have to have just the right amount of negative reinforcement, or the right amount of, like, let's say, just spelling things out very clearly, so that way when you do something well, that you've done it well. Because if you just get positive praise all day, then it means nothing. But if you get negative praise, if you get negative feedback all day, then you don't know what is actually good or bad, and therefore you have no frame of reference. So, I mean, there is a balance, but I mean, I think it's whatever positive praise you get, it always has to be through the lens of trying to achieve that kind of goal of excellence. But again, you don't ever want to be without it, because when you're without it, then it's just a void, and you start to hate yourself. You start to think you're not adequate, all that kind of stuff. So it's definitely a fusion there. And I think that his great failing is that he skews so heavily on the negative reinforcement side that, even a drill sergeant would be like, okay, that's enough. So that being said, this is such a character-driven piece that we got to compare and contrast our master and apprentice. So we've got our protagonist, Andrew Neiman, who is our jazz drummer at Schaefer, the very prestigious music college. What do we think of our dear Andrew at Neiman?
I mean, he's, he has his moments where he's a bit of a bitch. But I think that's supposed to be the deal there. This is where I disagree with a little bit. I wasn't disagreeing on the Kanye thing. He's fucking hilarious. It's the only reason I like it. I'm not saying he's talented or anything.
Because he's mentally ill.
Hey, you got to get your entertainment where you can. And I'm not just gonna laugh at the crazy guy on the corner, but the crazy people on TV, for sure, I'm laughing at him. But I think that this kid truly is passionate about drumming. I think that he wants to great in a way that's not necessarily meaning just successful.
Mhm.
He truly does want to like master this craft that he's clearly been like into since he was a kid, you know. And there is a bit later where we get that whole moment where he's like, you know, realizing that this whole thing has kind of sucked that love of drumming out of him for a minute. So, you know, he's kind of trying to figure out, I think, towards the end how to balance those two, but also show this dude up. But I think that, you know, he genuinely has the passion for it and everything there to be great. And that's exactly the reason why, you know, J.K. Simmons' character, I keep wanting to say J.K. Rowling, so I'm just going to say that.
Slightly different.
That would be a movie. Do the J.K. Rowling biopic and cast J.K. Simmons as J.K. Rowling.
And he's just fucking yelling at Harry on set or something.
Well, I was getting ready to say she comes back with another Harry Potter book where Fletcher's a music teacher.
But, you know, he makes sense as that kid that this dude would think, you know, because he's not just trying to be part of this prestigious band group. I mean, he's even before, you know, he's involved in that, he's tirelessly training and listening to the shit and has immersed himself in drumming, you know. So I was endeared to him right away pretty much because it was like, damn, this kid's like serious, you know. And then who knew how crazy it would get. I thought there was going to be feel good moments every so often.
I was being a little bit flip. I was being a little bit flip when I was talking before. He does have talent, and he is driven and dedicated and passionate about music, and so there is that. But my point was more about he is so passionate about his ain true love of music, that he really has basically consigned the rest of humanity to the afterthoughts. Like, you know, at one point he says essentially that he sees no point in friends. You know, our lovely Melissa Benoit. He takes her out on a really nice, adorably cute date, and then later he's just a complete dick to her. He's just like,
reaction to like it's like it's so pretentious and douchey that at first she thinks it's a joke.
So,
it's like, but what's up?
I have a comment on that part. Though I do agree with you a little bit that he does have some of the qualities that could lead to this sort of thing at the beginning. I do not consider him at the beginning of the movie to be the same person he is in the middle or at the end. Matter of fact, he is a different person emotionally and as a human being at all three of those stages. And you can see that the training and that the pressure has started to build to that point. By the time you get to where they're breaking it off in kind of the late middle of the movie, he is at the boiling point, and a lot of that is really the teaching method of the guy there, because that is that
a lot of it is. But the point I was going to continue on with is I actually know someone who's almost identical to him personality wise. And I do not believe you can put it all on the teacher, because I know someone who has an identical personality. And that's one of the reasons I find him so insufferable. Because
I agree, but I don't think that he would have been quite like he was.
That's probably true.
The seed of it was there.
Concert band.
Yeah, the seed of it
was just there. That's
here's this is gonna sound weird coming from me, because I will defend him in this respect, because under normal circumstances I would 100% agree with you, because if there's one thing I hate in movies and in real life, but in movies also, I hate it with these men that totally like throw away great girls and they don't value them, they don't cherish them, all that stuff. Like I'm thinking of like, and they usually do it in like this really mamby-pamby kind of way. It's why I hate it. It's why I hated him in the Spectacular Now, because his character does exactly that. And it's why I hated Scott Pilgrim, the movie version of him. It's why I hated those kinds of characters, because it's like, do you know how much people would be, how people are begging to have, someone like this in their lives, and you're just so callously throwing them away.
Exactly.
Fuck you.
Right.
That is normally my reaction. I will defend this character. I will defend him because some critical distinctions here. One, this guy is not mamby-pamby in the least. This guy is driven, and that is a very attractive trait in a, romantically or otherwise. It's just a magnetic trait for anybody to have. Period. So that he's got that. Number one. Number two. He and the girl Melissa Benoist, also known as Melissa Benoist, whichever one it is. Correct us, audience. The two of them, they have a cutesy meetup, but like if you listen to them talk to each other just about their interests and everything, they have no business whatsoever being together at all.
Nah, I disagree. He's being pretty much like a sort of elitist dick right from the onset of that, though, because he's like, you just go to college, you're not like trying to be great at something, and it's like, does she have to be?
Well, I mean, I agree. I agree, and I disagree at the same time. So, like, I agree that, and I'll tell you why. So, and that's part of the next point, which is that yes, I think that part of his failing at that point in his character arc, driven as he is, he commits the fatal sin of, we might call it pretension, but I would call it. That he thinks that, and I know this because I fell into this exact same pitfall at his age, which is that you think that in your pursuit of your goal, that everything else is pretty much secondary to that goal, when in fact, especially when it comes to the arts, what you find, if you stick with it, what you find is the lesson that Francis Ford Coppola teaches us, which is he felt the same thing when he was young. He felt like he had to give up everything, including and especially family, in service of his art. And in fact, what he found was that having a wife and children made him want to be a better artist. And now, granted, not everyone is like that, but I think that at this point in this character's arc, he is at that kind of young, admittedly driven, admittedly talented artist, but he is at that place where he feels like these two things are not compatible. And in this specific case, these two people, given what all they do or don't desire from their lives, they have no business being together. And so when he lets her off, when he dumps her, which I think the way he did it was kind of dickish, but I also I can understand why he would do it that way and why he would do it at that time, because he's trying to not only be great, but he's also trying to figure out this immense puzzle that is his teacher, because it's not just about doing the work well, it's trying to figure out your instructor. And that can be its own battle.
I mean, I would say that he massively preempted the shit. Like he probably should have given it the old college try, as they say, before he just went full douche mode, and dumped his girlfriend.
Well, and again, I can say from personal life experience that these kinds of things do happen. That people with this sort of personality will do this kind of thing. And he, in his defense, there is that lovely awkward dinner scene where apparently, I guess his uncle and cousins are over or something. And, they're going on and on about one of them's on Model UN and one's on football. And, how's your drumming coming along? And it's like, and they're all just being so snooty about him. And then, I like one of the great interchanges there is that his cousin's like finally like, well, I got a reply for you, Andrew. You think Carlton football's a joke? Come play with us. Andrew's like, 4 words you will never hear from the NFL.
Yeah.
See, my favorite was
like, what a
his dad's line where he repeats it right back to him, you know.
And that's
like,
and you see that's
that's
what makes him so different from, like, say,
Right.
his character in The Spectacular Now. His character in that film, same year, by the way. Actually, no, sorry, previous year. His character in The Spectacular Now is like the diametric opposite of this guy, because his character there, and admittedly he's in high school, so there's a little bit of leeway there, but his character there is directionless. He doesn't care about anything. He treats his girlfriend like shit. He treats the people around him like shit. He thinks he's a lot smarter than he really is, even though he really is not good at anything. And I'm just like, fuck you, you know. But then here, you know, the guy is at least talented. He knows where he wants to be. He's committing a lot of those kinds of early young man mistakes of pretension, but the direction is at least right. And you can totally get why this guy would do that. And admittedly, you know, he could have been a lot crueler about it. It's more so that he's just cutting it to the quick. And he probably could have given it the old college try, but I highly doubt in their case that it would have worked. And in fact,
see, again, you're looking at this more from somebody that relates more to the driven part of it. Okay. A lot of times with people like that, they need somebody normal to balance them out, to make them a better artist. You know what I mean? So, and at the end of the day, they probably would have been. They're just never going to see each other, you know.
Well, here's how we can have it both ways here, because you are right. The types of people that, from what I understand, like the people for whom this works out, you know, people can be very driven in their specific areas, and then in areas that are not those things, they can either dismiss them outright, like I think he tends to do, or they can be like, you know, it's not my thing, but, you know, you have fun. And I'm sure given enough time, he'd probably get there. And
got there when he was living in that Roach Motel apartment, and he tried to pick her up, but I don't
know. On the trajectory that Teller was going, I don't know if he would have gotten to the better part, because it's like he was on a more and more driven trajectory, because the next year he was Mr. Fantastic. So, you know, he was
well, the point being that like generally in those partnerships that work, from what I understand, if they do work, the person, you know, it's like you can both be really passionate about your specific areas, but you can also be supportive of the other person's endeavor, even if it's not your thing. And so therefore it can help balance the other person out. I got the sense that this girl, like, she really didn't have a whole lot of ambition or direction about much of anything. Because it's perfectly good if she was committed to something that wasn't jazz, because if he'd have been one of those guys that's like, it's all jazz or nothing and you can't possibly understand that, you know, if you can't understand that, then we shouldn't be together. Then it's like, well, that, even if she did understand it, then they'd be competing with each other, you know, so that wouldn't have worked.
There wouldn't have been a beginning if he was like that. But
yeah,
we
exactly.
really should move beyond the relationship between the two. Though it is a part of this film, it's definitely not the whole film.
No.
And maybe even get into the actual plot as it can be, because a lot of this, I think, does hit in. I really consider this story to be in 3 separate pieces.
Yeah, 3 acts.
Piece that kind of that introduces your characters. It kind of introduces him to our insane teacher, and eventually where he gets basically recruited, even though the teacher, you could see a little bit of the personality with the teacher dismissing him or appearing to dismiss him outright. And
I love that bit, dude.
Well, so
he comes back and he's like, "Whoopsie daisy, forgot the jacket." That was
Well, so in those initial scenes, you know, we see him touring the classroom without people in it, and you get his initial meeting with Fletcher, you know, and you get, you know, Fletcher's I can understand why he sees him as kind of a puzzle to be solved, because he is simultaneously outright dismissive, but also like he leaves the door open just enough to let him kind of run, burst his way through. And you get that sense kind of in those scenes where, he's kind of closing the door on him right off the bat, but then also kind of leaving it open and kind of being just nice enough to give him enough of a reason to keep going.
And I mean, the psychology of this is very interesting, that you can see throughout. And since we spent time on the relationship, I want to spend a moment on that. And you guys can refute me once I get through this little basic point. So the idea with the teacher, the way that he does it is he scouts these people, and he says it. He reveals everything in the very first conversation that he has with him when he does his little heart-to-heart with him, where he talks about the guy first discovering music, first becoming Bird, essentially, when somebody threw something at his head. He reveals his motives, and his treatment at that point, because there are three types of people that he has in his class. He has those people that he just feels aren't cutting it, which he cuts fairly quickly.
Yeah.
He has the people that he feels are doing fine, which he doesn't do anything with. You notice there are people in that class that he does nothing with. He's like, cool. Oh yeah, you were playing out of tune. It was actually you that was playing out of tune.
Right.
He said that both in that and the short film. And but no, that was the end of it. But then you have those that he actually considers.
Well, he does make a very strong point there that to him, it's worse if you don't even know.
Well, that's the thing.
Yeah.
But even that guy, but he doesn't hound the guy who was actually playing out of tune and may or may not have known that he was playing out of tune. Then he basically says, "Get it right, move on." He's like a regular, just slightly eccentric teacher. But then there are those that he considers true potential prodigies, and those people are the ones that he hits, like our main character. He hits them hard. He played underhanded. It wasn't. I am pretty darn sure it was Fletcher that took that sheet music at that time.
Yeah,
because he was setting that stuff up. He even alluded to it. Don't set this stuff out here; it will be gone. But that's the thing is, he was setting it up. He sets up people to drive them, to get them more out there, because that's his teaching method. He looks at this guy and then he hounds them. So those are the three types of students that he has, and I do think that in this case, he looked at him as a true prodigy, even at the end, where you think this dude is throwing him a curveball just because he's a total asshole, which part of him is. But at the end, you think to yourself, well, maybe this was him trying to say, no, don't quit. Don't give up on your dreams. This is one final test to see if you really do have what it takes to push beyond that barrier.
Right.
Absolutely.
And I do especially love, too, how they make a point to illustrate that it's not based on any specific instrument that he prefers. You know, like our kid in the movie is a drummer. But the previous kid, who he later talks about passing away or whatever, which is really the moment where you see that despite all of his bullshit dysfunction and like going overboard with it, he legitimately does care about these kids on some level, or at least the ones that he deems to be, you know, these future greats or whatever. But he was a saxophonist.
With the
kid, he played the sax. Go ahead.
You see the interaction when he talks with the former student.
And then it's immediately back into the fucking cauldron, and I love it. But you know, he's not playing favorites based on your position in this band. He's looking at every position to see where that talent lies. You know, main kid in this was a saxophonist, or I mean, a drummer. The other kid played sax. He's a pianist or whatever. I'm sure he's multi-instrumental. He's you know, whatever the word for that is. But he plays piano. So it's like he's just trying to unlock the potential in these kids. He doesn't really care what you play. You could be back there banging a cymbal probably.
Well, Well, he's just
and if he
the
thought
way
that
in which
you had the potential to bang that cymbal great, you know.
Yeah, and I can definitely sympathize with that desire to find the next great musician, especially with something like jazz, which, you know, is most definitely not in its heyday anymore. But you know, it's like he wants to
Well,
find
and he
these
talks
great
about
people.
that.
Yeah, he does.
Talks about that Starbucks jazz, as he puts it, or whatever.
Exactly. Well, but so like in those first, you know, few acts there, we've got you know, a series of not just lessons and, you know, him pushing some people harder than others because he knows that they can take it, or that they're worth it, rather. You know, because he knows well enough to not go barking up the wrong tree and to not waste his efforts on those who he doesn't think have it. So again, it's very deliberate. It's not like because I've known people that they're just cruel and, you know, they blow up at everybody just because that's who they are. And they have poor emotional regulation and that kind of stuff. And that's not really the case here. This is very calculated. But you know, in those first few acts there, you've got a lot of those kinds of, you know, give and take, and, you know, things that are very clearly designed to, you know, be tests, just not of the conventional academic kind.
Well, it's worth noting that just about the very first instruction he gives Neiman is a test. He says, "Be at this class at 6 a.m. and don't be late." And of course, he sees his clock. It's like 6:02. Oh crap! And he runs down there, and he's there by like 6:15 or whatever. And no one shows up. No one shows up, and the class files in at just before 9 o'clock. The teacher walks in.
And it's not even scheduled till 9. Like, he did that just to fuck with them, you know. And he fell and like ate shit hard coming down those stairs, but still brushed himself off and like made it to class, you know. So that shows right out of the gate that he's like kind of willing to bleed for the shit, you know.
Right, but it also shows that the teacher is willing to throw out seemingly cruel and capricious tests from the get-go, you know, and he never does call him on being late, so you don't know if he actually knew he was late or not. But he was there when the teacher walked in the door.
Coffee and having a bagel, man. Like, he knew.
Well, yeah, he did walk in a few minutes late. It's like you see Neiman's watching the clock, going, "Everyone's here," or what, you know. And it was like 2 minutes after that the teacher walks in, and he's like
pulling a Jules and Vincent, being like, "It's not quite 10 yet. Let's hang back for a minute."
Right, exactly. He was getting into character.
Dave's trying to say something.
Oh, sorry.
I feel like the intensity of an authority figure on a student, depending upon the situation, can be borderline abusive.
This is full blown abusive.
Oh yeah.
No borderline necessary.
Yeah, this is full blown abusive, but I also know and have heard of people who have been under the tutelage of something similar to this, you know. So I do know that there are teachers out there that do this, and they're still in teaching because of teachers unions. So
some of them just get great results, dude. I mean, you know, to use pro wrestling as an example, you went to Stu Hart's dungeon in Canada, he would fucking break you as a man. You know, but by the time you came out of there, you were an absolute iron gauntlet of a human being and ready to put up with anything that pro wrestling had to throw at you. I mean, I think the key in this is really with Fletcher, or whatever the hell his name is, you know, JK's role. He like 60 to 70% of it is kind of warranted. It's that last 30 fucking 7%. You know, you guys, it's like almost 120% that this dude is
37.
Yeah, well, you know what I mean. We're well over 100% there, right?
Well, there's
and
that's why
it's that bit that he needs to dial down. A lot of it is actually constructive, but
exactly.
he takes
well,
it too far,
That's exactly why, like, it's perfectly good to push people. It's just a matter of doing it in such a way that it is about the work, and it's not about them as people. It's not about because he takes it way the hell too far with like the language he uses,
talking about his mom leaving him and shit. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that's like extra,
Well, and the kind of things he says to and about students, if they're there or not there, and like so he's not only is he unfiltered, but like when he is unfiltered, you can tell that what's in there is really ugly. That he like he has
there's a mean spirit to it.
Yes, well, a mean spirit and kind of a sadistic drive, albeit relative to other sadistic drives out there. This one is at least aimed at a good place. It's just the way that he's choosing to get there is so horrible. But it's like the kind of colorful language he uses, like the give a retard a calculator and he'll try and turn on the TV with it. It's like holy crap,
Yeah.
Right. But I mean, a good example of the balance is I don't even think chucking a cymbal at him in that particular moment is necessarily so far over. I mean, he wasn't going to hit him, but actually smacking him repeatedly is fucked up.
Yeah. Like you could totally sue.
Yes. There's the gesture.
Was it dragging or rushing? Which was it? My dragging or my rushing?
He certainly learned it quick, but I mean, there's like, the getting so fucking passionate that he chucks a chair or something that might seem out of line to most people, but I mean these aren't high school kids, they're adults, they're just striving for something insane here. That maybe proves a bit of a point. To get up there in his face and smack him repeatedly is where it becomes like excessive abuse, man.
Exactly. Well, there's proving a point in a dramatic fashion, and then there is you could get arrested for assault, kind of.
Right. The chucking of the chair to me felt more like when the coach comes in at halftime and fucking just yeets that water cooler across the room, But when he actually started smacking him, it got kind of gross,
Exactly. And that's why. If anything, this could have been, and granted, it's not the story they're telling, but like there are a lot of elements here as far as like, about how various institutions, in this case, academia, how they will shield people who should not be shielded based on their behavior and stuff, because they get good results, because they do X, Y, and Z, that they're willing to turn a blind eye to it. Or in this case, it's just not enough people stood up, to say no.
Or even on a layer above that, you also see how it's not just the higher ups, the school board people or whatever shielding him. Like the kid himself, it took them a lot of convincing to get him towards the end to finally say something about it. Like at first he was like, he didn't do anything, because and that's where it works to where you don't even need the cover up, because these kids are so driven to try to like succeed in this group that they're willing to overlook the areas where it goes over the line as well.
Or they're like concerned that if they do speak up, it may ruin their chances or what have you.
Either or, it's a vicious cycle it creates, I think. And this type of shit, while this I read was not based on a true story, this shit for sure existed or exists potentially still out there somewhere at some like rich douchebag put your pinky up when you drink your tea.
Well, you could easily see a narrative like this in we were talking earlier about how this is somewhat unconventional. I could easily see a narrative like this in like a college sports team or something along those lines. It's kind of unusual to see it based on jazz music, but you could see like a football coach or something like that.
Seen that at some point.
We probably have.
They did like a storyline about it on Friday Night Lights or something like that.
Right.
Well, actually, yourself that it can definitely happen on a musical level.
Oh yeah.
Because I mean, we both knew that teacher that did that.
Yeah.
Now I was there a lot longer, but
that teacher drummed me out. But it was he had a very different method. He was the overly apologetic. Like he spent a half hour apologizing to me for kicking me out of the choir. I would have almost preferred this speakers. Just get out of my classroom.
His was more of a manipulating thing, but he would get in there. I mean, I remember this very well, where he would tell people, and I think it was you, that he was like, well, I have labs to do for my major. Drop it.
I was a science major. He wanted me to drop my lab so I could take singing lessons.
He better not throw no chalk at my Jake, or I'm gonna have to hit him up on Facebook today.
I have an example in just my own line of like I'm thinking screenwriting specifically. So I took at UNC Chapel Hill, I was in the writing for the screen and stage minor, which was the only minor of its kind for undergraduates in the country. So I was very thankful to be like a full-blown minor, like a structured 2-year program where you have to take classes at a certain time in a certain sequence, etc. So I was very thankful to be in there. I had taken previous screenwriting classes that were not part of that, which they subsequently got rid of because they wanted to keep it kind of all in the family. I got in there. The professor that ran the thing, he really liked me because he knew that I had the film repertoire, that I didn't just see recent things. I had seen classics. I could talk to him about, stuff from the 30s and 40s and stuff. So he liked me on that front. I had already shown that I did good work, but he pushed us in that program. And, he was not above, not like humiliating us, but like he would not play nice with your script. If he thought it wasn't good, he would tell you straight out. And, he was somebody that, like, on a couple fronts, like on a structural level, on a storytelling level, formatting, blah, 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 he would tell you straight out. And I knew most people in the class did not like him. I was one of the few that really did, and I was very loyal because he pushed us and he molded us, and at least for me. And I felt like the kinds of work that I have since done and am doing are a result of the kind of discipline that I got from that program. And and he was never cruel about it, and I thought, and in fact, like, he kind of chewed out a student once, and then he asked me later on, he was like, do you think I was too hard on him? So he was someone that he was not above remorse or above, tailoring it. But like, then I think about some of the other people in there, which there weren't very many, but like one in particular was way too permissive and way too didn't give useful feedback in any kind of way. And the people around us there, they loved him. I did not like him because I felt like I felt like his feedback wasn't genuine. It wasn't sincere. It didn't mean anything. So again, you can achieve the balance and create, people that are better off than they started out to be through that kind of discipline in a way that our dear Mr. Fletcher doesn't seem to understand. And that's why he ends up getting shit canned, because enough people have the courage with which to rightfully get him fired, because I think he committed all manners of fireable offenses. But,
Oh, yeah. And
go ahead.
Did we at some point say spoilers?
There might be at least one. I don't know. It could be.
I think mostly the spoiler warning is carried in the word podcast,
Right.
It's like over an hour of us talking about it. We're going to give some shit away. So we warned you.
In terms of that discipline, what happens, we've got some back and forth there with like the chair throwing and with the, were you rushing or were you dragging? We got some of that, but then we've also got, which I really felt for Andrew at this juncture when the other guy is looking to be, the new core drummer, and he's starting to court someone else, almost like trying to make him jealous in a weird way. And it's like, oh, that must hurt. And so therefore, when they have to have that drum off and they, make each other's, they make their fingers bleed and all that stuff. It's like, that whole thing is like,
clean the blood off my drums.
Well, but see, I mean, at the same time, though, it works. right? And I know that's coming from like sports because that's the reason there's like a first or a second string, you know. And some people are content to just sit on second string and warm the fucking bench, you know. But if you really want it, you're going to be on top of it. And make no mistake, that first string dude too is watching his game every time. And those guys that actually care enough to keep up the same pace, even though they've been made first string, are the dudes that become the great quarterbacks of the world type thing, you know. So there is part of it that works. I just don't know the way he does it is sane.
he is attempting to do what you should do, which is burn away the chaff, you know, burn away all of the things that are not conducive to success or to progress or whatever. Because again, I like our protagonist because he doesn't have time for the usual kind of superficialities that people like to surround themselves with, like a security blanket. You know, he is driven and he knows what matters. And again, in some respects, it's like, what good things are you willing to sacrifice to get there? Like, you know, a relationship, which admittedly that was the wrong person to be in a relationship with, but like, you know, that's sort of some of the failings on his part. But, you know,
he also, I think one of the other key relationships in the film, we haven't done a shout out to Paul Reiser, who plays his father. His poor father's just
together.
Yeah, but it's like one of the only things they have a decent relationship, but you get the very strong feeling that he more humors his father than anything else. And it's kind of
denies the Raisinets breaks my heart.
Yeah, I know. Although I have to admit that's an interesting combo.
Oh, you've never done that, or with like milk?
No, I haven't.
Oh,
you know, I could do it with milk duds because if you're melting the chocolate, you're melting that really hard caramel.
That actually sounds good.
And that really, to me, that would be good. But Raisinets, I'm not.
Dude, you're basically okay. Because the thing is, you're sitting there for a movie, right? I'm gonna explain to you a little movie junk science real quick. I'll let you guys get back to it. You put the Raisinets in the shit, right? And it melts. And at first, you're like, "Damn, this is kind of sticky." Oh, I don't mind licking my fingers for a moment. But then later on, as you get engrossed in the movie, the shit hardens up in there a bit, and then you're pulling out basically like trail mix chunks. The real pro move is to dump some M&Ms into it after the Raisinets. You know, after the Raisinets have started to set up a little bit like a good concrete or something. You toss those M&Ms in there, and then you're basically eating badass little clumps of trail mix.
I don't know. My thing in the movies was always those nonpareils. I bet that would have been really good.
You
I'm
should
so lazy anymore and just get like a big thing of Sour Patch Kids and just eat those till my tongue hurts.
You should have a cooking show or something. With that kind of advice.
Cooking at the movies.
Yeah, there you go.
Hell yes.
Well, but the big turning point of this whole thing, because by this point we've seen our backs and our forths and our little victories, our little setbacks, etc. The turning point is the big competition. Our dear Andrew, he leaves his drumsticks, has to go back and get him, and gets in the car accident, which holy crap, that was totally out of nowhere. But
dude, I gotta go on record as saying, like, all the horror movies that we all watch, whatever, nothing scares me still to this day, other than sharks in movies. Well, certain movies. Like those unexpected, like, semi hits him from the every time. I'm like, I don't know if it's so lame because it's
one. And if it was a shark driving the car, oh boy.
Oh man, that's just double trouble. I mean,
and this one has some interesting behind the scenes stuff too, because I'm sure you guys may have noticed Miles Teller has some scars. He was in a car wreck years ago. He was in a major car wreck apparently. And I read that Damien Chazelle himself was in a car wreck during the production of this film.
Dude, and that's like died of a car wreck. They say
which one?
the kid that remember when he comes in crying, the teacher. Like,
well,
that
that's
kid
what he
died of a car
said,
wreck as
and
well.
That's what he said. And
that's
it
what
turns
he
out hung
said.
himself,
Later,
yeah.
they found out he killed himself. Yeah, but
Was that the
Yeah.
same kid though?
yeah,
Oh, I didn't make that connection. Well, thanks for
Yep.
that.
yeah.
That was
The
a,
whole what I love about that whole sequence
Mhm.
is that that really is the turning point for both characters, but
Right.
it's a couple things. It's a lot of pressure put on this kid,
Yeah.
because it's a big event, and then out of nowhere, some admittedly, in any other circumstance those would be extenuating circumstances. I was in a car crash, kind of a big deal. But he comes in anyway, all bloodied up and awful, and can
Mhm.
barely play. But it's like, I would give him some points for even showing up. But it's like,
the way he
me-
comes barreling in and shoving them aside,
Yeah.
saying, "No, it's my part."
Well,
Like if he had showed up and said, "Look, I made it,
Well,
but you play."
that's
I
one of
can't
those
play.
moments where the tough love
That
was
was-
warranted. I
yeah.
think where it was like, get the fuck out of here,
Right.
you cocky weasel. Like
Right.
even if it was a normal
It
teacher
was like-
situation.
I think
Go ahead,
I
Brandon.
think there was a part where the teacher was something like he was talking about like, "Well, you gave him my part," and he's like, "It's my part. I loan it to whoever I want."
Yeah.
It's
Which
like,
I mean, technically that's true. I mean, he is
Yeah.
the band leader. He gets to do what he wants with the parts.
What are you
Right.
saying now, Brett?
Sorry.
well, I mean, again, this is a part of that about that plan. He didn't necessarily plan for him to have the accident, but none
Right.
of them. I mean, you can see in the beginning where that one guy, when that music is lost, he just goes off on him because he knows that guy is not the kind to forgive.
Mhm.
And so obviously there's that pressure. Like he's thinking, I'm out, I'm screwed. But in
Mhm.
reality, of course, so he's not really hearing what is actually being said.
Right. That's
The
fair.
idea basically is you screwed up, own up that you screwed up. This is your punishment for screwing up.
Mhm.
Suck it up, practice harder. You'll get another
Don't forget
chance
your
down the
fucking
road.
sticks at the goddamn
Yeah.
Enterprise. Rent the place, like
Right.
and the thing is, when he comes over,
Mhm.
it's subtle. A lot of the moments that make,
Mhm.
I think I get what you guys are saying, where it's like the second time around, the teacher character was slightly, if ever so slightly, we're talking like decimal points and shit involved here. Less horrible of a character. There are those subtle moments. Like he's
Right.
genuinely concerned that first time he comes over, because I think he says something like, "What the hell, man?"
Yeah.
And then walks away for a moment and kind of lets him have his chance, But just even that little
Right.
subtleness of him being like, that look in his face, and he's like, "What the hell, man?" Like the
Mhm.
man
Yeah.
part of that is kind of almost like, a little term of endearment thing there. That's not, you're not just
Right.
going to talk to the other kids. He wasn't asking him
Yeah.
if there was a fucking Mars bar on the floor or something,
Mhm.
He was
Yeah.
genuinely concerned. He was like, "Whoa, this is gnarly.
Well, and,
what happened?"
well, what is that spur? It's that, Andrew attacks him, and,
And
it's
he doesn't
like
even
that.
retaliate. Like I think that's one of those moments where even he was kind of, maybe I'm reading too much into the subtleties there because of the genuine concern thing, but it felt like one of those moments where it was like, maybe he even realized he pushed this kid a little too far, because he's
Yeah.
a cut dude. He could have blasted that fool and like
Right.
knocked him out instantly,
Yeah. Well, but that,
And there-
it leads to his being expelled from Schaefer, but then of course that's where the whole, the student killed himself, and so he agrees to be a anonymous witness, so in other words, both characters, they undergo a lot of the same arc points, the
True.
same points in their character arc. They go at it, that they get hit at roughly the same times, because
the other kid just takes it way harder. I do want to interject here.
Yes, go for
little
it.
levity. I didn't realize it was the same kid. Like, I guess I didn't catch his name in that first interaction. This was my first and only time watching it. But I was more focused on that Mars bar joke. And in my fat kid brain, as soon as he said it, like, there's not a Mars bar down there. I was like, but there could be, dude. A lot of backpacks on the floor and shit tumbles out sometimes. I found
True.
candy bars in school, 'cause it's like, whoa, a payday, literally. Like, check that out. So that's all I wanted to mention was when he said that, I was in my fat kid brain. I was like, there could be one though.
I also do want to mention one little thing here.
And Mars
this
bars
was
are good.
One could say this was also a test because that performance, the teacher Fletcher says like this is 2 hours. Give yourself enough time, but basically. The entire band was on their own device to get a place 2 hours away on their own.
Right.
And and you see this guy wants to take the bus at first, and he finds out the hard way. That's just the bus ends up getting a flat. And I've been in that position. I've been in that position too, of being a college student who needed to get somewhere and didn't really have anyone to call. And that's when he found out how valuable friends could be. But he ends up doing the enterprise thing and leaving his.
Yeah, it's also when he found out how valuable fucking turn signals and stop signs can.
Yes.
Well, I mean, again, it's all about valuing time, and he never really got that. I think he ended up again. There was a part of it that had that egocentrism, like I deserve that part. I'm too important for them to go on without me, and that left him. And I think the message that the lesson that was being taught, and he was being taught even there, you need to plan out your time. Everybody else got here because they probably left way ahead of time. And that goes right back to the show up at 6 o'clock. That idea, exactly. You need to be there.
He squanders it from the get-go. He's late. Like he very much has that thing going where he's good at something, so he thinks that entitles him to some shit. Like his brother or his cousins or whoever the fuck those kids are.
Yeah.
That are like football guys. You know, right from the onset, he goes out and asks that girl out because he's like, scored. I'm in the class, you know. So he goes and he asks her out, and they do their pizza thing, and then he ends up being late to the first thing, you know. And then later on, you know, after his confidence is dashed and he's living in that Roach Motel, and then he gets that gig with Schaefer again, he calls her up again, you know. It's like he only wants these people around when he's got something to show off, and I can see where there's like that sort of persistent douchebag element to him. But he seems to have a silent realization moment after he calls that girl, where he's like, maybe I'm kind of a prick.
Well, he also is somebody who, and I've kind of fallen into this trap before also, which I hope I'm a lot less bad at it than I perhaps once was. He strikes me as the kind of person who he thinks that he's only as valuable as his latest achievement. And that is a very, very seductive thing to fall into, and it can destroy you when you are not achieving something at that particular moment.
And usually will.
Exactly. And so, you know, I would hope that I'm better at it now than I was, but I can also sympathize with that instinct.
Listen, and I think you achieve something every time you get in here. That's just being sexy, baby. Don't forget it.
Well, but you know what I mean? It's like, you know, if your brain is oriented that way and you're not achieving something, you're not getting where you want to be, then it can tear you up inside. And but then, you know, both men humbled, they have that great interaction where they actually talk like, you know, civilized human beings to each other, because they've had their collective asses kicked for, you know, their own reasons. But that's where you find out that they are more similar than they are different, at least in terms of their stated goals of becoming the best or finding the best, you know.
True enough. What were you saying, Brandon?
Well, we got a half hour left, so let's take this bad boy home so we can.
That's what I'm trying to do here.
Yep.
I think we're right at the end, though, aren't we?
Yeah, but because what happens next, you know, well, partially with the, you know, he tries to get the girl to come back, but she's like, yeah, you had your chance, you know.
Yep.
Well,
which again, you know,
she's a little kinder than that, but she mentions her boyfriend. I don't know if he'll be up for it, you know.
Exactly. Yeah, she's a lot nicer about it than I put it, but like, that is essentially what he gets out of it, is that, you know, you had your chance and you made your choice and now you got to live with it, which again, that's very important, you know, that, you know, you can make whatever choice you make in service of whatever, you know, you have to live with it.
Yep, and he
then
does.
of course,
and I mean, there's even a little element to that scene where he's still trying to, like, I don't know, like, upsell it or have that stupid prideful element where he just, because I think when he asks him to do it, he says what is it, the JVC means or something like that.
Yeah.
But when he's telling her about it, she asks him what it is, and he just like does it. He just says, "Oh, it's like it's a jazz thing," you know.
Right.
So he doesn't want to admit that he's like stepped down a peg with it, you know, as if she would even fucking know the difference.
Yeah, she wouldn't. But that gets us to our climax, in which we get the line that did sort of make me metaphorically shit my pants, which is the, "Do you think I'm fucking stupid? I knew it was you." And I was like, holy shit.
I thought real shit my pants when he said that. And
it's like
when he came back over and he's like, "I'll gouge your fucking eyes out." I love that part.
Well, it's like you got to mention when they were talking in the dive bar, he's like, "Oh, you know, well, it's the Schaefer playlist, you know, Caravan, Whiplash, you know." So he doesn't give him any indication that he needs to prepare for it. So of course he doesn't think he really needs to prepare. You know, he does a little, but he you know. But then yes, he comes by. He like announces a song that the guy had no clue was coming. And he looks around, everyone's got the music but him. And that's why he comes over. He drops a line under his breath. And I admit, I was like, wow, he got you good.
Well, now the whole climax, like, to me, that's more thrilling than your standard movie climax, even though it's just people playing instruments. It's like this thing is a nail biter, because you know that he is not prepared. He, you know, does fail at it pretty spectacularly, and you think this is like the ultimate revenge, the ultimate final humiliation. But then, you know,
there's that very pointed, like, what the fuck, seriously, again? Like, this movie just doesn't even, I thought that the whole, when Brandon told me that was like the reward, I was like, what the fuck is he talking about? This is horrible. But that's the point, is to take you right to that, and then he's like, nah, fuck this, you know. Sorry,
well, then that's at that juncture, that's where our hero, in our metaphorical kind of master apprentice thing, that's where he kind of presents his, you know, masterpiece in that definition of it, because he takes all the pain, all the skills, all the drive, all the everything, pulls the rug out from under the guy who's used to pulling the rugs out from under people, and you know, uses, you know, everything that he was taught, and does something that finally earns him the respect of his master, but then also kind of he earns his own respect, because he knows his own self-respect, because he knows that he, you know, he used his own, you know, skills against him basically, and he was able to finally beat him based on what he was taught by him. And it's like, there is no greater,
I'll cue you in. That's what he said.
Yeah. And there's no greater feeling than after you've, you know, been abused for a long time, but also been taught something by that person. There's no greater feeling than being able to show them that not only have you beaten them, but you did so with all of the things that they taught you how to do. And you know, that is a very satisfying feeling. But it's also, he did win out over him, but he also won. It was a hard won respect between the two of them. And it doesn't mean, I know, and they don't, you know, they're not gonna be best buddies now. They're probably gonna still not really like to necessarily be around each other.
Best of enemies,
frenemies.
Yeah. Well, but
make some good jazz together, though.
Exactly, and they've earned each other's respect, and I think that that's saying a lot, because I mean, you can not like somebody all day long.
Oh yeah, for sure, but you can respect them and have a good working relationship with them based on
I would say,
mutual
look at Johnny and Joey Ramone.
Yeah,
there you go.
Yeah.
And there's something, I mean, honestly, like, and I have yet to really, that's something I kind of hope to achieve one day, is that, like, I mean, preferably I'd like to like and respect the person at the same time, but like generally I have not liked certain people because I don't respect them, because I don't think that they have what it takes and that kind of stuff. I have not really yet come across somebody that I don't like, but I do respect them. Because when I do respect somebody, I tend to like them, because, you know, it is, those things are very closely connected, but I do acknowledge that you can respect the hell out of someone that you don't even necessarily like or get along with all the time, but they are really good at what they do. I have yet to find that. I would like to, which again, I would, my preference would be I like and respect the person. But like, if you have to choose one, it's like, you know, usually the people I respect, I tend to like, but that's just because that's the way my brain's wired.
Agreed.
You know, but it's like, I find it very hard to like someone if I don't respect them. Because if you prove yourself worthy of respect, then, you know, I think that's a really admirable thing. But I agree, if they were to continue their association, which who knows if they will or they won't, but like, they could produce good music together and thus achieve their goals of achieving greatness.
And that's one thing that should be said about this one.
Music.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, some of, you know, I can only really speak from mostly like a metal and hip hop standpoint, but some of the best music in the fucking world is made by dudes that can barely stand each other sometimes. You know?
One example was that?
I would say just give an example like the Ramones. They hated each other.
Yeah. I was going to give an example.
Danzig fucking hates everybody.
And you know, the Beatles, you know, things were not rosy. Yeah. Like even pre-Yoko, things were not rosy all the time. You know, that they had their conflicts and stuff. They had Brian Epstein to kind of diffuse the tension, and then of course he died tragically. But like, you know, they were at odds with each other, despite them making some of the best popular music of all time. Yeah, but they were at odds with each other, and they were at the most at odds with each other when they made, I think, their best album, the White Album. You know, and yeah, they so in other words, you can make great art from that kind of conflict. It just has to be that right balance of, you don't always get along, but you do respect each other, you know.
Like one example that of the groups I've gotten to see, one group that is famous for that is Indigo Girls. Amy Ray, Emily Saliers apparently don't like each other much at all. I've seen them perform live, and they perform beautifully together. So it's like, you know. But I do want to make one point. Make one definite point about the end of the film, is that performance is the end of the film. You don't get any indication. You don't get any sort of prologue. I mean, not prologue, epilogue. You know, you don't get anything that, like, a nice, neat little bow. You know, it's left entirely up to you. Do you think they're going to go on to make great music together? Do you think they'll kind of curtly nod to each other and never see each other again, or do you think that there's going to be another fist fight before it's
a mixture of both?
I think, honestly, I think it's, even though it is not at all a Cinderella story in the same way that Rocky is, not by a long shot, it does have a similar ending to Rocky, in the sense that, you know, where do we end it? You know, Rocky went the distance. He lasted the 15 rounds. It was a split decision, you know, and we end on him having gotten Adrian in his arms, you cut on that freeze frame, and it's like, and that's all you need. At that time, not counting all the sequels and spin-offs and all that stuff, but like just for the context of that movie, it's like that's all you needed. You ended on that high note. Here, it's like all that was needed was they earned each other's respect and admiration.
Right. They should have done Whiplash 2, Abusive Boogaloo.
I had one different take that I had on this film. Which happened more towards this, because the first take I had from this film was mainly that the ending was just about his revenge, that Fletcher is just being a total dick about it, and our put upon student finally was able to flip it around and utilize all that he learned to say, nope, it's my show now. That was my original take on it. This time, I felt like it was a different take. I still feel like this was a last engineered lesson by Fletcher. And everything comes to clarity in that scene at the bar, because there are two different Fletchers. There is a Fletcher that is kind of behind the scenes that's not on, and there's a Fletcher that's the conductor that is on. And there is a lot of that shows this is what he expected of him as a student. This is what he expects of him here. And I think
he knows that's what he's capable of. I don't even think it's an expectation thing.
I think really and truly it was, he saw what was happening, because again, the guy, our main character had given up on what he wanted to do. He'd given up on jazz. He'd given up on the drums. You could see that. And this was, and of course Fletcher knew this sort of thing. I'm sure he had to have. This is part of how he operated. I still think that this was his thought of, this guy has a lot of talent. He's going to either sink or swim here, but I'm going to prove that my stuff does work. Because he had said before, he never had his bird. He never had his true person that he could see and get a prodigy. And I do feel like this was his last attempt to take one of those students and make them into something great. Well, dude, I do feel like this is also a Fletcher victory as well as the student's personal victory.
Because there's like that moment, and it's a real Mr. Holland's Opus moment in this show, except about 1,000,000 times less cheerful. But he's taught something at that point, and you see that playing out, because he's coming over there and he's like, what the hell are you doing? And he's like, I'll cue you in. And then they do the whole first thing or most or a portion of it. And then he comes over and he's like, I'll gouge your fucking eyes out. And he hits that cymbal and almost smacks him in the face with it.
Yes.
And to me, that almost called back to that when he was really testing him, like Dave's profile pic there earlier in the movie, and he's banging that cowbell in his face, and then he chucks it over his head and stuff like that, and he's like, he's making him
needs more cowbell,
a great absolutely great live jazz drummer right there. And in that last scene, it's like he's that final test of it, and he's just casually bangs that cymbal and almost hits him, and he just absolutely fucking murders it.
Well, this is basically like the drama version of, guess what? I got a fever, and the only prescription is more
cowbell. One of the greatest things of all time. Dude,
I know, but this is basically the drama version of it.
True enough. Since we're basically on the topic of the drumming in this movie.
Yes, the music.
The shit that goes down in this is nuts. I don't know if they were doubling him. I'm sure they were doubling him in from behind with like actual. There's a lot of actual drumming that goes down.
There was some doubling, but Miles Teller apparently had been drumming for about 10 years. Yeah, he is a drummer.
He's killing it. And honestly, with the blood and the tears and the fucking sweat, these are the most metal drumming sequences I've ever seen in a movie. And I've seen several movies based on heavy metal music and specific bands that have never captured that same sort of Like that's what you imagine it's like behind a drum set, and this does it 100 times over, almost to gruesome effect. I'm sure big portion of that $3 million they spent making it was just on fake sweat.
Yeah. Well,
I'm not sure how much of it was fake.
A lot of it was, I'm sure, returned, but there was some fake sweat for sure. But it's just, it's insane, dude. When they're bleeding on the drums and stuff, like you could go watch that movie about Mayhem that came out a couple of years ago, Lords of Chaos. You're not going to see anything as metal in that movie as you are with the drumming sequences.
And from what I understand, apparently J.K. Simmons was doing his own piano playing too. He had to brush up on it.
It certainly looked like it.
Yeah.
Well,
he did it quite good.
You gotta love the fact that this guy, this so hard-edged guy, what's his instrument is piano, which tends to be a very elegant, very obviously technically skilled instrument. But like, I'm thinking of like, you can play Chopin on that, which can be unbelievably sad and beautiful, or it can be on crack, like some of his really, really fast pieces. But like, I mean, the music in this thing, like again, this made me respect, which again, I did not like Miles Teller before this, and then it made me respect him very much, which I still don't know enough about him as like a person or his other roles and stuff, but it earned my respect quite a bit because he is very clearly doing his own drumming, and he's making me believe that he is putting in the blood, the sweat, the tears to do this thing. And we say that very nonchalantly, or at least I do, blood, sweat, and tears. You see all three of them in this thing at the same time.
And, don't get me wrong, too. I mean, it's perfectly believable that he was actually drumming. I mean, I'm shocked. I was shocked to find it out because I assumed from some of those cuts from the back that they were like shooting a stand-in.
Like I said, he did have a double.
Work. I mean, that's how you shoot a drummer.
He did have a double for parts of it too, but that also speaks to the film's editing, and that's one of the reasons why it's won the Oscar for editing. It's generally with music, but also with sports films. Like anytime you can convincingly show an actor performing above their level of talent in something that physically demanding, that's some pretty solid editing. So.
Well, and I mean, honestly, this was again, like I think actors, they can the stereotype is that they're very like spoiled and pampered, and they don't want to work hard and blah blah blah. Which for some of them, that's true, and then other ones, you get like the Robert De Niro, I pulled my tooth out, to get myself in the headspace, or I, like in New York, he learned the saxophone for that, for that role. And he was very method on that level. And it's like, I'm at the point where it's like, I don't really respect people that aren't going to take it seriously and aren't going to like do the work, and go all the way to do the research, put in the blood, sweat, and tears, because I forget who said it. I forget who's actually, who it was. I think it was either Bruce Campbell or Sam Raimi. I want to say it was Bruce Campbell who said, the harder it is to make, the easier it is to watch. And I think that's the case.
I don't know. On the same hand, I would have to like bring up Machine Gun Kelly in that fucking Motley Crue movie, The Dirt. Like he killed it as Tommy Lee. And he did know a bit of drumming, like enough so that they could, fill it in with a double, I'm sure, to make it like look like he was playing all the parts of all the songs. But that dude's performance outside of that is what made Tommy Lee fucking awesome in the movie, because he nailed it.
I mean, devote. I don't necessarily mean like if that helps you, then do it. But I mean, like whatever it is you decide to put your
at least
time
learn a bit, to make it look realistic. Like
but I mean, like just bottom line is be committed to what you're doing. Because like for example, like here's a good example. So like Amadeus. Tom Hulse, he did learn how to he didn't learn how to play the piano, but he learned how to like put his fingers in the right place because like he did practice like all the time, and the keys were not sounded, and eventually, you know, when he did have the sounded keyboard, he sounded horrible. But like but in the finished film, if you look at the apparently musicians that have looked at that, they were like, you know, he does not have one finger in one area, one key where it should not be. You know, and so yeah, now did that make him a master pianist? No, but like he did it. You know, he did
took the time to make it look legit. You know.
Yes, he did the work, and
okay,
it doesn't.
I agree. I don't expect him to
if,
learn how to fucking like, you know,
No.
play drums or be a sniper or whatever I cast you in as a movie, but
no.
make it look real at least.
Well, yeah, you don't have to. Yeah, especially if you're like a hitman or something, you don't have to like get real world experience. But you do have to. You do have to get yourself into that headspace and devote yourself completely to it. You know, so. And I giving him all the praise in the world for having done that, and his drumming seems to reflect that. So we've talked about music, editing, very, very slick. Let's think. No special effects other than the blood, which again, you know,
I'm not sure how much of that was special effects.
More terrifying than most blood that you see in any horror film.
Right.
Especially like how they didn't show the car
crash. The car crash and the subsequent that would definitely be makeup and effects, and I think that was effective. Yeah.
You know, had I done it, I would have maybe had him a little bit more fucked up instead. Because when really, as I was watching that scene when he came in, other than his hand bleeding pretty profusely, which could also be excused by him just getting in a fight or something. Like he ran out acting like a cocky prick, and he came back just kind of bloodied. You know,
I don't know. He seemed a little dazed. I wouldn't be surprised if he was concussed. You know, he'd probably be.
Oh well, again, all things you could excuse by like a raucous fight for being a prick. You know, like
hey, tie it into the title. Maybe he got whiplash from
maybe.
Well, you might have. You don't know.
So, do we want to do favorites?
Yeah, let's do some favorites.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think my favorite scene in the entire movie is where he refuses the Raisinets, and his dad's like, "What? Really? Why didn't you say no, I think my favorite scene in the entire movie is, of course, the fucking finale. I mean, it's just so insanely. It brings all that intenseness to like the crescendo, you know, and then you see this kind of genuine respect develop between them over the course of that musical number, where by the end, J.K. Simmons' character is not teaching him spells at Hogwarts, but is instead just, you know, kind of in awe of his skills at the same time and fully committed to like knowing this guy knows what he's doing. Because there's a point too where after he kind of comes over, like before they do that epic part where he's like helping him go down in tempo, and then they come back up and swell into the whole thing, where he's looking over at him constantly the whole time, but then he stops for a minute and actually just starts looking at the rest of the band, you know, and that's how you know that he's like, this guy's got it locked, so I don't have to look at him unless we're communicating something to each other, you know, which I think is the deal with like any conductor, I would imagine. Like you want your dudes dialed in. That I don't know if all of them go about the crazy prison status level shit that fucking J.K. Simmons does in this movie to get there. But I imagine that's the kind of band you want going on, where you can have your drummer doing his thing and you can step over and, you know, conduct, because those dudes are actually helping them keep in time. I don't know if any of you guys actually took band in school, but it is like you watch that dude and he kind of helps. It's like a cheat sheet.
Right.
And
what about Dave? Do you have a favorite moment or scene or anything?
I would have to say that my favorite moment in the film was when he said, "I know it was you."
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
That's a good one. Another one is like, all right, let's make with the, what does he call him? He calls him like a Mick Patty Cracker.
Yeah.
And then he's like, you know, you actually do look like a leprechaun. I think I'm gonna start calling you Flannery. That was like one of my favorite lines in the movie.
As well was pretty entertaining. I thought it was interesting how he came back, and his father was actually watching through the crack, and it's like his
Such
look
a
was
great moment.
It feel like he was watching a genius. Like
he finally saw the greatness in his own son.
Correct.
You know, and that was
Right.
Forrest, favorite scene.
I would agree about the final drumming number. Just very intense. Very intense. Kind of that point where they finally have each other's respect. And just like when he completely breaks out of that drum solo.
Yeah. Brandon?
I like the bar scene, oddly enough, because at first I didn't like that scene because I thought to myself, is this sneaky way to screw him over? But after looking over this a second time, I like it because it does really give you the insight as to his teaching method and what goes on. He may not be a great person, but I don't necessarily feel that his intent was entirely sinister.
I don't even think he's a bad person. He's just a bad teacher in certain elements, you know.
Right.
Jake?
Well, I'm going to actually go ahead real quick and make one minor complaint about Damien Chazelle's choices just real quick, because I think the man has made 2 movies in a row that show he has an ear for music. He has a great eye for talent in people who know how to use music. And yet in this film, he has Melissa Benoist. He didn't even cast her for La La Land. And she is a wonderful singer. I would have loved to if he had incorporated that. So she better be in his next film.
Yeah, I mean, give him time. He'll probably do something else musical related.
Right.
But that was a missed opportunity. But I will say I'm not sure this is my favorite, but I'll go ahead and mention it specifically with that final scene. I do love when that shoe drops, when he comes over and says, "I knew it was you." I mean, that was just a great moment. But then when he comes back and he launches into that 5-minute drum solo, that's one other thing that this one has in common with Pulp Fiction, because Pulp Fiction has that Jack Rabbit Slim's dance contest.
Yeah.
Two things that usually drop me cold right out of a movie are extended solos and dance numbers.
Yes.
Like if all they're doing is dancing or all they're doing is pounding on the drums and it goes more than a minute, I drift.
Yeah, I get a beer and take a whiz, you know.
Exactly. But one thing these 2 movies have in common is that I did not drift. I was riveted by that solo, and I give them props for that. That was impressive. And I will also agree with Brandon that some of the elements of that bar scene rank up there at the top too. That again, when he says there are no 2 words in the English language more harmful than good job. I don't fully agree with that, but that line stuck with me.
Can I just say one thing real quick before we advance? And that's this.
Well, sure.
I know we're never going to get a sequel to this movie. It's just not in the cards. But, and the only person here I can think of that probably will immediately know what I'm talking about is Forrest. But if we could somehow get J.K. Simmons' character deep faked into that Some Kind of Monster DVD where Metallica is fucking whining the entire time, I think that would be hilarious. He's just throwing drum chairs at him and shit.
At Lars.
Yes,
hey, I mean,
exactly.
I meant to watch that. I never got around to it.
Well, hey, you could get Andrew Neiman there, instead of the jazz Whiplash, have him play Whiplash by Metallica.
Yes.
Hell yes. One of their better songs, dude. But yeah, it's a good documentary to check out, Jake. You should watch it.
Cool.
I think
my
favorite shit. I mean, it's so hard to pick a favorite because I love, my favorites that come to mind, like throwing the chair at his head, where you rushing, a lot of quotes, where you rushing, where you're dragging. the good job bits, and you think I'm fucking stupid. I knew it was you. I'd probably give it up to that, just because that made me like metaphorically shit myself with fear.
Several others
and that's
that we cannot repeat, but only J.K. Simmons could say in a way that makes you feel like you're on an episode of Scared Straight.
Yeah, basically. But that I probably give it up to that moment, just because it is not easy to make me feel that afraid for a character in any movie, let alone like a horror movie or any kind of movie. But it's like I was shitting myself for this character, and so major props to that. And just overall, it's like this was a movie that I'm sure musicians can appreciate it even more, but even for like a non-musically oriented person or a non-jazz person, it's like I could relate to this in all kinds of ways. And so just massive props to them for having made something that speaks to people beyond that immediate circle. And thanks again to our good friends at Talk Movies with Us for suggesting it.
Hear, hear.
Indeed.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Definitely. So next we have another film from suggested to us by Talk Movies to us. So stay tuned for more exciting film talk as we head over to our Inside Movies Galore channel. So thank you for listening. Have a great day, evening, or morning, wherever you are. And thanks for listening. Like,
Not
share,
quite my tempo.
Good night.
I'm sure that's that Pulp Fiction with old what is it?
John Travolta and Uma Thurman and Samuel L.
How would
Jackson.
we reverse their names? Would it be like